With a trial still underway and a verdict still far off, Prime Minister Netanyahu just did the unthinkable. He formally asked Israel's president for a pardon. No conviction, no sentencing, just a direct appeal to end it all. In this episode, we unpack the legal gamble, the political drama it has unleashed, and what this means for the future of Israel's justice system and its longest-serving leader. Stay tuned for Jerusalem Minute. Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. Josh Hasten here, correspondent for JNS, along with JNS CEO Alex Traiman. Alex, breaking news just now, as reported by JNS.org. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu submits a formal request for a pardon to President Isaac Herzog here, the head of state. On Sunday this happened. The office of the president is aware that this is an extraordinary request which carries with it significant implications, according to a statement by President Herzog's office. Alex, what do we know right now?
Well, that the prime minister submitted a 111-page letter to President Herzog's office asking for clemency. He's asking for the president to drop the case, the corruption charges against Prime Minister Netanyahu. He, in his letter, cited that there is precedent for dropping a case before a conviction, because previously we had thought that the only way a pardon could happen would be if Netanyahu accepted some kind of a plea deal, and then he could be pardoned after a guilty conviction. This is not what the prime minister is asking for. He's asking for the president rather, to have the charges dropped. He said that in his letter that there's no mechanism right now for the legal system to drop these charges, even though potentially there should be, because you had the court turn around to the prosecution and say that they essentially didn't have a case in the case 4000, which was the only case that had a charge of fraud attached to it. The cross-examination of Netanyahu is expected to last deep into 2026. So the prime minister would have to continue serving. The letter states that the prime minister claims that due to the personal concerns of one of the judges, that the prime minister has now been asked to increase his testimony to 4 days a week. And the prime minister is saying, listen, we're at a historic moment for the state of Israel. When we're completing wars against Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, Iran, and others, that you have a president of the United States is trying to make all kind of normalization agreements, and that there's no way for the prime minister to conduct his duties as a prime minister should be able to conduct them if he's forced to sit in this trial. We know that the president of the United States made a comment that he made a tweet at one point, or a post on Truth Social, that the president should consider pardoning Prime Minister Netanyahu. Then when the president came to the Knesset on the holiday of Sukkot, he spoke to the Knesset. He turned around to President Herzog. He said, hey, why don't you pardon this guy? And we were wondering if the prime minister would ever submit a formal request, because the president had said, look, it's nice that the president of the United States is saying that, but the only way I can possibly consider any kind of clemency is if the prime minister himself would make a formal request for clemency. Now he's done that. The prime minister is saying that this is in the national interest, is in the interest of unity. This is an interest of restoring trust in the justice system, because many people are losing trust. So I think that this is a very, very big news. The president acknowledging that he's received this request, acknowledging the sensitivity of this request. And now we have to see what type of metal President Herzog is made of. Will he ultimately grant this clemency request? Will he stall it? Can this happen before an upcoming election? Obviously, the prime minister wants to see himself absolved prior to an upcoming election. I think this is a political watershed moment, and we just have to see what happens.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, Alex. What happens next? What is the time frame? Do we know at this juncture what's going to happen?
I mean, this story just breaking moments before we got into the studio. We don't exactly know, what the next stages are, how the process of clemency works. I mean, we're going to have to speak to some legal experts about that. I'm not certain that it is as simple as it is in the United States, whereby the president can essentially grant pardon to anybody at any time with the signing of a pen, as long as it's not an auto pen. But we have to see now what's going to happen. I think you're going to see the internal political debate explode over this news.
Make sure you go to jns.org for this developing story. It is going to be a whirlwind, so make sure you go to JNS. We have you covered on this. And in other news, the IDF says troops came under fire early Friday morning. 6 soldiers wounded, 3 seriously, in the Syrian village of Beit Jin. That's about 7 kilometers east of the border, the Israeli border, after they detained 2 members of the Al-Jama al-Islamiyah Islamic group, a terrorist organization there. The IDF acting on intelligence information collected in recent weeks, indicating that these 2 individuals, brothers, were planning to carry out terrorist attacks against Israel. Alex, do you think this is an escalation of the situation in southern Syria?
Well, we've seen that happening for a long time since al-Shara and his troops from HTS came in and took over Syria. Is that minorities have been under attack, Druze, Christians, Alawites. The Druze are a community that is very close to Israel because you have something like 150,000 Druze actually living inside of Israel. And Israel has acted to protect them at various points since the fall of former Syrian President Bashar Assad. Questions about whether these 2 members of this terrorist organization were connected in some way to the government of al-Shara. And what's interesting about it is just a few weeks ago, we were discussing whether or not the Syrian government would consider normalizing relations with Israel. Al-Shara went to the White House. He said that normalization could only take place if Israel would withdraw from territory. Right here, you're seeing the exact reason why Israel is not willing to withdraw from territory, because, quite frankly, the area is not secure. And if the IDF pulls out of that area, what that's going to mean is that terrorist forces are going to fill that vacuum. So instead of having an Israeli pullout, you're going to see Israel remain there. What's really ironic about it is that earlier, after the fall of Bashar Assad, I received reports that the president had told Israeli officials that they could take a much larger portion of Syria. In fact, that they could even take and keep a large portion of Syria, something that Israel wasn't willing to do because, quite frankly, how many troops would it take to secure that area? And there's a lot of Muslims in between those areas where the Druze live and the Israeli border, and they don't want to be part of Israel, and Israel doesn't want to govern them. So lots of reasons why Israel didn't do what the president had suggested, but lots of reasons why Israel's still going to remain in parts of southern Syria.
Do you think we can see a much greater escalation there? I mean, Israel's already fighting on so many fronts, Gaza, Lebanon. I mean, we have ceasefires and whatnot, but we still have active troops there, troops in Syria. But could this blow out of control in which Israel's to send much greater forces into Syria?
Well, I don't see Syria being much of a short-term threat to the Israeli home front right now in the same way that Hamas poses a threat and Hezbollah poses a threat, because Syria has been largely demilitarized by the IDF with the fall of Bashar Assad. One of the most important moves that Prime Minister Netanyahu ordered was the complete demilitarization of Syria in a matter of just days after the fall of Bashar Assad. So you have these shock forces. Some of them are terrorists, some of them are Bedouins acting in their own interests, all connected to al-Shara, the new president of Syria. But largely speaking, they just have machine guns. So certainly troops that are in southern Syria could fall under threat because assault rifles kill, machine guns kill. But in terms of their threat to the Israeli home front, I see that as limited. So I don't really see a major operation. But perhaps Israel will have to designate more troops to secure that area.
Turning to Gaza now, Alex, and this is making the rounds all over the world in the media. Israel killed 2 young Gazans who crossed over that yellow line, which differentiates between the Israeli-controlled area and the area still technically under Hamas control. And you know, when you say youngsters or teenagers are killed, you have no idea what their intention is. How many times in Judea and Samaria has a terrorist attack been launched rather by a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old? So Israel getting some backlash because of the age of these 2, but we don't know at this point what their intentions were. We do know they crossed that yellow line, which they should not have done.
Well, also you have what happens from time to time is that adults will dispatch kids forward into an area, either just to test out the waters of, how safe it is, how freely people can walk there, but also, these are families that they don't have homes right now, or they don't have like Gaza doesn't look like it has a future in the present. It doesn't have a present. Maybe it has a future depending on how the Trump administration and others come and rebuild it. But the situation is bad. And if you send in kids, towards enemy lines, and those kids get killed. So first of all, those kids become martyrs, and it's a great honor for the family, right? So instead of Jews that protect their children, you have Arabs that use their children as human shields, and from time to time, we'll actually send kids, dispatch them towards enemy lines, and get them killed. And then those kids become martyrs, and then also that replenishes the blood libels and the anti-Israel narrative by saying, look, is the IDF target its children, right? So this could be strategic. It could be what the family claims, that those kids were just going to collect firewood for their wheelchair-bound father, right? That's what the parents say. So, we don't really know exactly what happened, but this is still, I think it just goes to show this is still there's a ceasefire, but it's kind of like an active war zone, right? So on the one hand, it's not like the all-out fighting as there was before, but it's a highly sensitive area. IDF troops are looking for any strange movement, and unfortunately, when they see strange movement, they're gonna open up fire. I mean, this is what happens, and so it's a sad reality of what happens in war. It's dangerous, and it's going to continue to remain dangerous, and we're going to continue to remain dangerous because Hamas is still operating in the area, right? If Hamas would have disarmed, and Gaza was going to be demilitarized, then the IDF could have more patience to watch strange movements. But as long as they know that they can come under active fire from terrorist organizations, they're on high alert. And when an army is under high alert and they see strange movements, and there was other incidents that same day and the day before where they had to open fire, this is what happens.
I was literally 2 weeks ago at the Gaza border, and while there is a ceasefire, all day long you see troops going into Gaza, you hear explosions. It's still a war going on, so people shouldn't think this war is over. And as we said before, there is a ceasefire with Lebanon, with Hezbollah and Lebanon. This week, actually, we marked 1 year since that ceasefire. The IDF sending out a press release talking about how the 91st Division has been operating in Lebanon to prevent Hezbollah, the terrorist organization, from rebuilding. Just last week, however, though, we talked about a potential opening of the conflict again with Hezbollah after Israel took out their second in command. And we're still kind of on this waiting pattern to see how Hezbollah will respond.
Right, and we talk about a year of ceasefire. So according to the reports, the IDF says that it carried out 1,200 targeted activities since the declaration of the ceasefire,
Yes,
and eliminating more than 370 terrorists of Hezbollah since the ceasefire. So you see what a ceasefire means. I mean, a ceasefire has been good for Israel in the sense that Hezbollah has not started launching rockets at Israel. And even with the elimination of this number two, the chief of staff of Hezbollah last week, we didn't see any return from Hezbollah to be firing rockets on Israel, and perhaps good that they didn't, because if that would happen, I think you would see the immediate movement of large numbers of troops and the IDF resuming not targeted operations, or rather like a true forward operation into southern Lebanon to go clean up some of that which was left behind during the IDF's first incursion into southern Lebanon, and also to take out what has been numerous attempts to rebuild Hezbollah's force capabilities inside southern Lebanon.
On the same topic, we had the Lebanese foreign minister this past week talking about how he would possibly be willing to negotiate directly with Israel. Let's take a look at that video.
أنا مع المفاوضات مع إسرائيل، مفاوضات مباشرة وصلح مع إسرائيل.
مباشرة؟
إيه
وصلح؟
وصلح مع إسرائيل أكيد. بدنا سلام. أنا مش صلح نروح نقعد نعمل شركة تطبيع ونروح ونجي، لا، بس أنا خيي جوزيف أبو فاضل. أنا خيي إذا بدي أدور سيارتي وروح على إسرائيل على القدس، بدي أكيد مينيموم بين 5 و6 ساعات.
So there you have the Lebanese foreign minister, Youssef Raji, saying that nothing is taboo. He would potentially be willing to talk directly with Israel. Usually we do it through mediators, but what do you make of this statement that he's willing to speak to us.
Well, I think in some ways it's actually trying to expose the Israeli weakness, because the Israeli strength has been to go and to take care of business. And what they did to Hezbollah, reducing their capability, something like 85%, most of their long-range rockets, their ability to fire those rockets, pushing their Radwan forces north, away from the Israeli border is very, very impressive military operation. And we see that Israel is, in a way, sort of desperate for these types of normalization agreements. We know about the Israeli-Saudi agreement, how much Israel and the Israeli government has been talking about normalizing with Saudi Arabia, even though there's a lot of people that say, you know, what gain does Israel have from having a formal normalization agreement? Maybe it's just better to have sort of commercial agreements and things happening under the radar. Don't have to have this pomp and circumstance, especially if that means, you know, that the Saudis are demanding a pathway to Palestinian statehood. We see that Israel wants some kind of agreement between itself and Syria, and President Trump trying to get agreement signed in order to advance his quest for a Nobel Prize. And same thing with Lebanon. And so what happens is, let's say that Lebanon does come forward and say, we want to negotiate an agreement, right? So if Israel signs some sort of agreement, then Israel has its hands tied behind its back so that it cannot violate the terms of the agreement that it signs. So in many ways, it doesn't seem like this is the appropriate time for Israel to enter into any kind of agreement with Lebanon, because the Lebanese army cannot take out Hezbollah. And that's what we've seen over the last year. I think the lesson of the whole last year was to give the Lebanese army a chance to further neutralize Hezbollah. They cannot do it for many reasons, including the fact that Hezbollah may just be wearing the uniforms of the Lebanese army for all we know at this point. It's only the IDF that's going to be able to take out Hezbollah and its capabilities, but obviously the Lebanese government wants Israel to put the brakes on the attacks inside its territory, especially after last week's attack deep inside Beirut. So, you know, I'm not surprised that you do hear some alternative voices in Lebanon calling for talks and negotiations.
Alex, let's take a look at Judea and Samaria. This is a highly troubling story, I find. Israeli Arabs helping Hamas smuggle weapons into Judea and Samaria. The arrests were made, according to the Shin Bet Israel Security Services this week, in the town of Kfar Qasim and in the southern Bedouin city of Rahat. You had several suspects who were involved in covert transfers of weapons and funds into Judea and Samaria to help Hamas cells there, trying to establish a smuggling network in Judea and Samaria. So very, very disturbing on that front.
Well, the same way that we've seen a buildup inside Gaza between 2005 when Israel pulled out of the Gaza Strip, the same way we saw the buildup in southern Lebanon since 2006 after the previous Israel Second Lebanon War, we've seen the major buildup of assault rifles, submachine guns, inside Judea and Samaria. You know, this is partially manufactured locally, but a lot of it is smuggling. We've seen many cases of smuggling coming from Jordan. Remember, we had that case of the Jordanian diplomat that every time he was coming across, he was bringing assault rifles. But here you see that even in Kfar Qasim and in Rahat, which is a Bedouin city in the south, that they are moving weapons. The question is, where are these weapons coming from? You know, are they coming from Jordan? Are they coming from, in the case of the Bedouin, are they coming from Egypt? Like, where are these weapons being manufactured? But there's been the mass distribution of weapons throughout Judea and Samaria. It used to be like in 2014, we had what was called the stabbing intifada, and we had car rammings, and we still do see those, of course, many instances of car rammings and stabbings. Just last week, we talked about on the show, you know, somebody drives into a bus stop, gets out of the car, starts stabbing people. But we have seen more and more and more instances of Palestinians opening fire, and that can be much, much more deadly because one terrorist can take out, you know, a dozen or more Israelis, you know, in just seconds with a machine gun.
Sticking with Judea and Samaria here, there was a video circulating through the media of Israeli soldiers who shot 2 terrorist suspects, and apparently they were apprehended. And then one of them, it looks like, went for something under her shirt. It was very, very suspicious as to what he was doing. And Israel then shot them. And of course, the world community going crazy, accusing the IDF of using too much force. I think even mentioned by Piers Morgan or whatnot. I saw it was like headline news on CNN. This is the IDF daily targeting the terrorists in Judea and Samaria. I know they thwart over 90% of these attacks. We don't have all the information right now, but the world community very, very quick to jump on Israel, jump on the IDF, take them to task in an anti-terror operation there.
Well, what happens here is you see, that a lot of operations are being recorded, right? Whether that's by surveillance cameras, whether that's by, other individuals in the area with cell phones. And it's very difficult for the IDF to operate without somebody catching whatever's happening, right? So, and then what happens is that you see the framing of an incident, right? So you don't see the full footage, you don't know what happened 5 minutes before, you don't know what happened 5 minutes after, you just see what happened in just, some 30, 45 second bit, and it looks bad, right? So again, we have this problem. The IDF is on high alert. Where is it on high alert? I mean, we just discussed it. You're on high alert in Syria. You're on high alert in Lebanon. You're on high alert in Gaza. And yes, there have been many, many IDF operations inside Judea and Samaria. In fact, it's because of the IDF that you didn't have the full-on blow up of this front in Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem, because the IDF cracked down very hard. Even inside some of these Israeli Arab cities, like in Lod and in Ramla and other places, where we saw rioting back in 2021. It didn't happen now because the Israeli police came in very forcefully into those areas at the beginning of the war. And there's been a lot of operations to so-called mow the grass using intelligence. This is obviously one of those operations, and yet you see that it's dangerous. The IDF is on high alert, and the IDF is not taking chances, right? And they're not taking garbage. And if they see that a Palestinian who's being apprehended is making a strange movement, the IDF has an obligation to protect its own lives in a combat situation at the expense of who it identifies as the enemy.
Absolutely. Alex, we're going to switch gears here and talk about the new plan to draft Haredi, or ultra-Orthodox soldiers, into the IDF. There's a little bit of outrage, I would say, in the Knesset this past week as Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee Chairman from the Likud, Boaz Bismuth, released his long-awaited revision of a government-backed bill regulating ultra-Orthodox enlistment, paving the way for its continued advancement toward the final 2 readings in order for it to become law. Now, maybe you can help us understand exactly what Bismuth's plan is and why people seem to be, at least from the opposition, and maybe even some of those from the coalition itself, are upset about this, think it doesn't go far enough in terms of forcing the Haredi ultra-Orthodox to join the IDF like other citizens throughout the country.
I think before you even get into what Bismuth's plan is, you have to back up and zoom out, because we know that this issue of whether ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim in Israel, can serve in the military is one of the most pressing social issues in the country, right? And it really has, the left pushes this hard. It's one of those focus-tested issues, but even on the right, you have people upset. And look at the National Religious Camp, for example, people that say, hey, we wear these yarmulkes on our head, we wear tzitzit, we observe Shabbat, we keep kosher, but we serve in the military. We study Torah, but we serve in the military. And the idea that their fellow brethren who study Torah will not serve in the military and gain exemptions, not only is it not fair, but it also has allowed the military over the years to move leftward, and you have a left-wing military, and it's not a good thing. You want to have a balanced military, and you want to have as many soldiers in the military as possible who study Torah, because having a military seems to be a Torah obligation right? And you see that the Torah says over and over again that all men age 20 and up should go into the military from all 12 tribes.
Right.
So it seems to be, on the one hand, biblical. On the other hand, it seems fair for all kind of reasons that the Orthodox should serve in the military. Now, why don't they serve in the military? Because when David Ben-Gurion was the prime minister, he cut some kind of a political deal with the heads of a yeshiva. But at the time, you had exemptions for like 500 students. So it wasn't the type of thing that really made a difference one way or the other to the performance of the Israeli military, even back then. And you have a lot of the situations in Israel today that are political, social issues are all on the basis of like little negotiations that happened in the beginning and the founding of the country, and those set precedent. And then you have other crises, and then the precedents come to a head, and then you say, what do we do? And then so people look back and say, well, what did we do last time? And this is what we did last time. Okay, so do that again, right? So you have these precedents which are created for whatever reason becoming canonized, and now you have a situation in which something like close to a quarter of the country is Haredi, and you have mass exemptions. So you had now fast forward, right? So now you had Yuli Edelstein, who was used to be the number 2 inside the Likud, and it seems like since these 5 elections cycles that Edelstein has really shifted towards the anti-Netanyahu camp, even from with inside the Likud. And he was the head of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and he was really trying to work with the opposition to draft a bill that would see the mass enlistment of ultra-Orthodox. And again, many people in the country want to see that, but who doesn't? The Orthodox, they don't want to see that. They're still looking for some degree of exemptions, and Netanyahu's government depends on their political support. So this is a very touch and go issue for Netanyahu. And so Edelstein came with a bit of a forceful plan, and the Haredi parties, they were going to potentially quit the government over that plan. So what Netanyahu did was he sacked Edelstein and he put in Boaz Bismuth. Bismuth used to be the editor-in-chief of Israel Hayom, and is very loyal to Netanyahu. And for him, this is a major promotion. And so he came up with a bill which is much, much more lenient towards the ultra-Orthodox. And what this bill does is it still includes exemptions for any ultra-Orthodox that is actively studying in a yeshiva. Okay, now what it does, on the other hand, it pushes for the drafting of ultra-Orthodox members that are not actively studying in yeshiva, saying, look, it's a choice. If you're studying actively in yeshiva, then, okay, we'll give you an exemption for the time being. But if you're not, then you need to come in. But what this does is it removes the penalties that were proposed in the previous bill for individuals after the age of 26. There's no more penalties for not serving in the military. Also, it removes the checks that were to be put in place to ensure that people are studying, right? So people could say, hey, we're registered to the yeshiva, we're studying, but in practice, they're actually not studying. And so this bill does nothing to ensure that those that are not studying are actually being pulled into the military. Now, what I see this bill is a delay tactic. It's a stall. Netanyahu knows that he's got less than a year until the elections. This bill, it could be discussed now, contentiously inside the Knesset, and potentially the coalition could pass it, right? I don't know that they'll pass it because I think there are some members of the coalition that are upset with it, but potentially it could get enough votes to pass. And then what will happen is it's going to go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is going to overturn it because the Supreme Court, for better or for worse, the Supreme Court has been very adamant in this equality of service. And so, as they do with many laws, they're likely to overturn it, and then they'll give the government another period of time to come up with a new law. And what happens is that you're just going to get closer and closer and closer to the election. So I think that Bismuth was installed really to just hit the pause button on the advance of this issue. Now, the problem is when you have politicians solve this issue, you get political band-aids, you get solutions that are not organic solutions, you get solutions that don't actually necessarily benefit the long-term good of the country. And I think that that's the situation that we're in. We're going to need to figure out how to get Haredim into the army. But I do think that if you're really serious about getting Haredim into the army, that the army has to do more to remove some of the obstacles, the challenges that the Orthodox claim with regard to serving in the military, because what the Orthodox really, really want more than anything is to know that if their boys go into the military, that they're going to come out of the military just as Orthodox, just as stringent, just as religiously observant as when they came in.
Where do you think this issue is for the Israeli voter in terms of the upcoming election? I mean, people talk about this all the time. I mean, I saw it in Israel Hayom over the weekend. It was like a top story, and it had, unfortunately, a whole group of parents who lost children fighting in the past war and in the IDF. And for them, this was a top issue as we head into election season.
Well, I think the opposition is going to make this one of their key issues because, again, these are focus-tested issues. They know it resonates with the public. And like you said, there are now parents of children that were lost in fighting. You have widows, you have orphans, and then you also have people that their husbands, their sons came out of military service in good health, but they were 300 days in military service, and they're just looking around and saying, why do I have to leave my family and leave my job? And in many cases, you've got people that were small business owners who have essentially lost their businesses or their businesses have taken a major hit. So they've taken a major economic hit because they've served their country in the military fighting a war that was brought upon it by external enemies. And these guys over here, they're not serving. You know, what's going on over here?
Right.
You know, so there is this issue, and there's a need for more soldiers. Like I know some really good national religious soldiers that have just been called up again and again and again and again, and they're doing what they need to do, but and they'll do what they need to do, but they don't like it when they see that people that are just as capable potentially are not serving. Now, you also have to make those groups more capable of serving. I mean, if people don't take physical education,
Right.
they're not geared to being physically active. We've got to work on the whole education. There's a lot of social issues in this country. This is probably the number one social issue in the country, but as long as you're dealing with external enemies, as long as you're in a political crisis, as long as you're in a crisis between the government and the Supreme Court, what happens is that these things become political footballs and you don't get solutions that really solve problems.
Let's take a look at what's going on in Dublin this week, Alex. The Dublin City Council apparently voting to rename Herzog Park, commemorating Israel's sixth president, Chaim Herzog, father of Israel's current president, Isaac Herzog. Israeli officials and some community leaders denouncing the proposal as anti-Semitic. So all the way in Dublin, they want to rename a park because they don't want it affiliated with anybody who was the president of the state of Israel, even though apparently his family had a long history in Dublin. I think Chaim Herzog's father was actually the chief rabbi, if I'm not mistaken. But what's going on over there in Dublin?
Yeah, so it's not just that the Irish want to rename Herzog Park and name it after some kind of like Irish hero, and they just, they don't care so much about the Jewish community that lived in Dublin for many years. I think you have about 3,000 Jews now living in Dublin, but they actually want to rename the park after Hind Rajab, a 6-year-old Palestinian girl who was killed while trying to flee Gaza City. And this motion to rename the park was brought by the Irish Sport Organization for Palestine, right? This doesn't even make sense. Like, why is it Irish Sport Organization for Palestine? They're the ones that brought before this committee the resolution to rename the park after Herzog. And like you said before, Herzog, who was the father of the current president, Isaac Herzog, you have Chaim Herzog. He was born in Ireland. He was Israel's sixth president. He was president for 10 years. And like you said, Chaim Herzog's father was the first chief rabbi of Ireland after Ireland seceded from Great Britain. In 1922, Herzog's father became the chief rabbi. And so you do have a long lineage of Jews living in Ireland, and even to this day. So what you see here is that the renaming of this park to take it away from Herzog. Now, Chaim Herzog has nothing to do with the war in Gaza, right? And you actually saw that the foreign minister, Helen McEntee, of Ireland said that this name change should not proceed, and she urges the Dublin city councillors to vote against it. And she said that while Ireland has been openly critical of Israel's policy and actions in Gaza and the West Bank, that renaming a Dublin park in this way to remove the name of an Irish Jewish man has nothing to do with this and has no place in our inclusive republic. So, she came out against it. You have a lot of comments from Israeli politicians, including Gideon Sa'ar, who's slamming the move. And Sa'ar actually said that Ireland is the epicenter of anti-Semitism in the world today. He said that of all the anti-Semitic countries in the world, and there are many, he says Ireland is basically the number one. So it's a difficult situation. My view on it is, if you don't want to name your park after Jews, we get the hint, right? And so I wonder if we'll see what happens, how the Jewish community there, I know that the current chief rabbi, Rabbi Weider in Ireland is, also saying this is anti-Semitic. And the question is how safe will, Dublin's Jews be in the future if the Dublin local council wants to change the name of a park that's named after, a great Irish Jew.
Well, as that's going on, we can also turn and cherish the friendships we do have in this world, in particular House Speaker Mike Johnson, who defended the U.S.-Israel alliance as a strategic necessity in the Middle East and said anti-Semitism must be universally rejected. And it seems like the comments that he made perhaps were directed against the right in the United States, who, the Tucker Carlsons and those who have come out in recent weeks, days, months, and even maybe years by now against the Jewish people and against the state of Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu thanking the speaker, responding, saying, "Thank you, Speaker Mike Johnson, for your strong and principled words about Israel. Your clarity and conviction strengthen our shared stand against terror." I think that's where his comments were directed, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that that's right. Questions about whether Tucker Carlson is actually behaving like a right winger, right? They talk about this being, anti-Semitism on the right, but the more and more people that I see Tucker Carlson interview, I'm like, this is not the right. Like,
right.
These are
fake right, the woke right.
Well, there's woke right, but then there's also progressives. I mean, he's literally had progressives on his show, and then he's had some people that I would call woke right or fake right that are quoting progressive outlets about Israel and about Netanyahu. So I don't even know if Tucker Carlson, if you can define him at this point as right. And I don't know if you can define Nick Fuentes, who, says that he supports Stalin and he supports Hitler. That's not right, that's left. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
So they've sort of like self-identified many of these on the right, and that's problematic. And these people may have voted for Trump because they're against the political system in America, and they see Trump as the ultimate outsider, but that doesn't make them the right wing. But I think what House Speaker Johnson did, and I would say that there's no greater friend of Israel in the Congress than Mike Johnson.
Sure.
And when he came in from taking over from McCarthy, I saw him, the first speech that he did was he came to the Republican Jewish Coalition, and it was like right after October 7th. And, we thought like, wow, what a blessing that Mike Johnson has now become the Speaker of the House, because he's just proven himself over and over again to be an ally of Prime Minister Netanyahu and an ally of the state of Israel. But he said that the support for Israel, he said everybody should acknowledge the importance of that relationship. He said that many Americans view support for Israel as rooted in, quote, scripturally based biblical reasons. But then he also said that even if you don't accept this biblical alliance, that you have to look at this objectively and say that it's really important to have an ally and partner in that corner of the world. And it's the only stable democracy in the Middle East. It's a tinderbox. And I heard, Ron Dermer talk about this also this year at the Republican Jewish Coalition. He said that the case for Israel and the U.S.-Israel relationship is an easy case to make, but you don't have too many people making it. He said if you want to have one ally, that is a security ally, you want it to be Israel, because Israel doesn't require America to put troops on the ground. It will fight against the enemies of America, right? This guy that we took out last week, the number 2 of Hezbollah in Lebanon last week, there was a $5 million bounty on his head from the United States, and Israel took him out. Okay, and you see that that's happening, that Israel is acting against the anti-American actors in the region. That's number one. Number two is that Israel gives significant intelligence back to the United States, protecting American citizens at home. Three, Israel gives a lot of information back about the use of F-35s and other equipment. You know, Israel and America jointly have developed the Iron Dome system and the Arrow system. These are missile defense systems that now the United States gets to use. You know, Israel has the Iron Dome. President Trump said Israel wants to have a Golden Dome. Well, a lot of that's going to be done with joint U.S. Israeli technology. So there's a lot of reasons why on the military level, on the defense level, that the Israel-America alliance is strong. Also on the technology level. And how many American multinational companies have their R&D centers in Israel, right? There's a lot of reasons why this relationship is strategically important for the United States. But ultimately, I think that what Johnson said about, you know, having this be scripturally based. I mean, the founders of the United States, they talked over and over again about God. They quoted over and over again the Old Testament, the Torah, and they felt that they were connected to that. And so the same way that, you know, by the way, Israel was created, it was the modern state of Israel was born out of British imperialism when they had the British mandate and they refused to set up a Jewish state as they were mandated to do after World War II. The United States also drew itself out of British imperialism. So there's a lot of commonalities of purpose. And certainly if you would poll Israelis and say, you know, is the United States an ally? You would get 100% of Israelis say the United States is our ally, right? If you would poll any of these other countries in the region, go poll in Gaza. How many Gazans would say the United States is our ally? How many Lebanese, how many Iranians, how many Jordanians would say the United States is our ally, right? Israel and Israelis love the United States. And I think naturally, intrinsically, Americans want to support Israel. There has been a bit of a schism that's, I think, being forcibly created, in part by the Qataris, in part by the Chinese, in part by others. But Mike Johnson has been the one example of, you know, really keeping that relationship strong. He gets it, and he's been a great friend.
Alex, we're almost out of time, but one last story here, sticking with the United States. It's very, very important to discuss. President Trump issuing an executive order ordering the Secretary of State and the Secretary of the Treasury in the U.S. concerning the designation of any Muslim Brotherhood chapters or other subdivisions, including those in Lebanon, Jordan, and Egypt, as foreign terrorist organizations. Prime Minister Netanyahu last week saying he praised President Trump for this decision to outlaw and designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, specifically out of those countries. Trump shared an article written by JNS correspondent Amelie Botbol about this very issue, which is pretty impressive. The President of the United States is sharing JNS material.
Well, I think it goes to show you that the Prime Minister and his office here in Israel, they read JNS, they communicate with JNS, and we know that the JNS articles get all the way to the White House. And here you see it, the president sharing this on Truth Social. It's not, JNS wasn't the only one to have this story, and yet the president chose to share a JNS story. I think it speaks a lot about the prominence and reliability of JNS articles and coverage. Now, back onto this issue about designating the Muslim Brotherhood chapters. So we know that the Muslim Brotherhood is declared already illegal in Jordan and in Egypt. We can remember back to the Arab Spring when President Obama withdrew his support for longtime Egyptian strongman and President Hosni Mubarak, and actually put his support behind Mohammed Morsi, who was running on behalf of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Correct.
And then they had an election. These are these classic, one election, one time, where Morsi became the president of Egypt. And it wasn't until El-Sisi, who was a member of the military under Mubarak, actually did a coup and took over Egypt, essentially. And then he designated the Egyptian chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. It's hard to imagine why the United States has not already designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. But here, I think it's important to note that nobody has been designated a terrorist group yet. The President of the United States, by his executive order, ordered the Secretary of State and others within his administration within 45 days to present a report about those in Lebanon and elsewhere that may be Egypt, Lebanon, and Jordan, whether that they should be listed as foreign terrorist organizations. And we saw that why? Because they've aided Hamas in the war against Israel. But I think what's important is, who is not listed here. Okay, we're not investigating the potential of Muslim Brotherhood chapters in Turkey, and we know that President Erdogan is a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, and many at this point suggest that he is the ideological leader of the Muslim Brotherhood today, and also Qatar, which is a major supporter of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. They're not part of the executive order, so you won't see Secretary of State Marco Rubio or others investigating whether there's Muslim Brotherhood chapters in those places that should be designated. Now, if they come back after 45 days with the report, there is the possibility that the sanctions could be leveled against these terrorist organizations. What it does do for Israel is it actually paves the way for Israel to investigate and determine whether the political party Ra'am, led by Mansour Abbas, could also be designated as a terrorist organization because of their loose affiliation with the southern chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Very interesting to see how that plays out, and if this report, which we just discussed, has an impact on Israel's elections. But we will see.
We remember that when Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid formed their so-called government of change after that fourth election, where they temporarily ousted Prime Minister Netanyahu with a 61-member government that brought every left-wing member of parliament into the coalition, but it also brought, for the first time, an Arab party, Ra'am, into the government. And while Ra'am in Israel is not seen as the most extreme of the Arab parties that are in the Knesset, and there are several Arab parties in the Knesset, Ra'am was the one that was willing to sit with this left-wing government and with Naftali Bennett to oust Netanyahu. And now Netanyahu could potentially have his coalition take a look at whether they would outlaw Ra'am on the basis of their association with the Muslim Brotherhood following after the executive order issued by President Trump.
Elections in Israel, the latest, October 2026. So we'll see what happens if it's then or if it comes earlier. Thanks so much for joining us here on JNS TV and Jerusalem Minute, of course. Josh Hasten here, correspondent, along with Alex Traiman, CEO. I want to give a shout out to the people behind the scenes here. Ryan Lifshitz, our producer, Zach Sickerman, Yuri Stretsky, station manager, Esther Eden, and the newest member of the JNS family, Aaron Wogelanter. Welcome to JNS. Make sure you give us a super thanks. Also donate to JNS. This is a reader-based news service, international news service, so you want to thank JNS and subscribe. And make sure you go to JNS TV for all the amazing content provided by JNS. Go to jns.org for all the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. Have a great week, everybody.